Hi there, welcome to SUSECON 2022. This is demo 1334, Understanding Continuous Delivery in Rancher. This goes with the presentation TUT 1051 that I did earlier. So I wanted to bring you in and show you real time what continuous delivery looks like inside of Rancher, how you can set it up, configure it, and kind of get you kick started. In this particular, so I've got two tabs open. One is this particular Rancher version that I've just set up. I fired it up just to do this because I wanted to show you what continuous delivery looks like when you first see it for the first time. And then when we jump into the other tab, you'll see something that's got a little bit more configuration done, but not fully configured. So the access to continuous delivery in the Rancher 2.6 interface is here on the left-hand side, top left-hand side of the screen. 2.5 has a different user interface when you first log in, so there will be a little differences there, but the setup and configuration and sort of the features are all pretty similar. So in this interface, you'll click on the hamburger menu and come down to continuous delivery. You'll notice before I do that, that listed for me, I've only got one cluster that's imported into this Rancher, and it is the Rancher management cluster itself. So when I go to continuous delivery, you'll notice that I have no repos defined. There's no clusters in this particular view, and I'll show you why, and no cluster groups. And one of the things I want to bring to your attention is that up here is a drop down. And this drop down will show you the different workspaces that are available, and we'll talk about what those are. But the Fleet Default workspace is where all of your downstream clusters will show up by default. The exception to any cluster showing here by default is for the local Rancher cluster. And if you click this download or this drop down, you will see another option for Fleet Local. That's where this local cluster goes. So you'll see that there is one local cluster, and it's called local. And there's been one group defined called default, which it is in. So very simple. Now, clusters and cluster groups. Well, clusters are easy because clusters are every cluster that is in your Rancher management system to be managed. All of your downstream clusters will all automatically show up here. So you don't have to worry about how to get them here. They will appear here for you automatically, irrespective of whether they're on-prem, edge, in the cloud, doesn't matter. They will all show up right here. Now, the cluster group creation is pretty simple. I can click the create button, give my my cluster group a name, my new CG cluster group, and really the only thing that's important is, well, besides the name, is using the the label, the key and value feature, that beautiful thing that they did for Kubernetes and making this such a dynamic environment and easy to configure and modify and mold to the way you want it to work, is the ability to label a cluster, give a cluster label, and it can have many. So that's the beautiful thing. And so in here, I would just want to list what label reference am I trying to say you need to have in order to be a member of this particular cluster group. And I could type in my key is red, and the value of the red key is blue. Doesn't matter. It's just a key value pair. You can make it up anything you want. And any cluster that appears in that particular workspace here called Fleet Local, any of the clusters that would appear here would then automatically show up as in my cluster group. And I'll show you a better example when I get into the other tab. But know that it's a very simple way to create cluster groups. Create cluster groups, give us the value, the key and value pair for that label, and it will match up those clusters and create instances within your cluster groups just by reference only using the label. So let's cancel that, and let's go over and take a look at. So this is again a very empty. This is what it'll first look like. Again, your clusters will be here all by default. If you remember in the presentation, if you happen to see it, one of the first steps you want to do is go in and create your cluster groups. Again, the important thing to note about Rancher's continuous delivery is that we're trying to provide management of clusters in terms of the application delivery and the configurations that we can push out at scale. So we're not looking at trying to do it onesie twosie. We're trying to say if you've got 5, 10, 100, 50, 100 cluster groups and thousands of clusters within those cluster groups, how do I manage this effectively? And Rancher's continuous delivery does that. So let me switch over to the other tab, which is logged in to my Rancher environment. I don't have a great number of clusters. It's not significant that we have a whole bunch. So this will make for a much better demo. But again, I click on the hamburger menu and I can see my clusters that are available to me. And I've got 3, and you can see the same 3 here on the default dashboard. But there's my continuous delivery link. So I click on that, and notice I do have and have created some Git repos here. In fact, I'm going to delete this one, and we'll recreate it just to give you an idea of how it works and what it looks like. So in my particular demo here, I do have a couple Git repos already defined. I can see that they're active, so that the connectivity to them are available. Now, in all 3 of my cases, the target repository that I'm pointing to is up in GitHub. And that sort of was the design around this, was that we had a centralized location where we could store our Helm charts, or we could store our YAML manifests or our customized files, and then distribute those en masse to as many clusters as we would like, or cluster groups. So if I go to my clusters link, remember clusters are all here by default. And notice I'm in Fleet default. If I go back to Fleet local, you'll notice there's only one here. So if I go back to Fleet default, I'll see these guys here. And I notice that it says 2 out of 3 nodes are available. So I might want to take a look and see if I've got a node that's not fired up. Yes, I've got a node that is stopped. So let me go fix that. See, real time. Let's go in and do a quick repair and get that started while we are waiting. I don't know if that was a fat finger on my part when I started up my virtual machines. So we'll give that a second, and that should complete here pretty soon. But remember, clusters should all be populated by default. Then I go in to create my cluster groups, and I've got a number. I've got edge clusters that are ARM architectured, or edge clusters that are x86-64. And I've got clusters that are AI focused, and I can have many others. And when if I take a look at one of my cluster groups, let's say the AI focused one, it's basically looking for any cluster that has a label that says purpose equals AI. Again, very simple, not difficult at all. And so that in and of itself would build me a cluster group. And notice I've got AI focus as a group name, but I've got no clusters defined that way. So I don't have any that this really applies to. I do have some that are edge ARM and edge 86-64. Let's take a look at the edge ARM, for example. Oh, and that's looking at architecture is in ARM and that the environment is in Edge. So both of those must be satisfied as a label on the cluster for this to work. So a data center ARM architecture box would not satisfy because its environment would probably not be Edge. So a simple, key value pair that's associated with the labels for a cluster is all you got to do to create your groups. And I see my node is coming up. So this should go to 3.3 here in just a minute. But let's talk about those labels. How do I add those labels to my clusters? Well, there's a couple ways I could do it. When you first created your cluster, you could have added labels then. Another option is to check this box and click Assign To, and then click on Add Set Label, where I can do purpose, and the value is AI, right? I think that was the value pair for my AI cluster group. So I could do purpose equals AI, and that would basically assign, once this is applied, that key value pair to that cluster group, and it would show up down here. Yep, and there it is, AI focused. And notice that as I've done that, whatever repo was assigned to AI is now being deployed to my cluster group, which has only got one cluster in it right now. So let's take a look at that. It was a cluster group called AI focused, and it's probably an error because it might be the wrong architecture of the code that I'm trying to deploy, but it was trying to do it automatically, obviously. Now my Git repo here monitoring. I need my Rancher CRDs are missing. Please install the appropriate CRDs. Well, luckily, the CRDs are not missing. In fact, if I edit this, you'll see from a repo perspective, I've got the paths monitoring and monitoring CRD. So this will actually resolve itself successfully once these CRDs are applied. In fact, if I maybe changed the order, I could have allowed the CRDs to be added first and then avoid this. But it's Kubernetes, and it will take care of itself. So let's go back and take a look at our repos. So we know the clusters get created by default. They're already there. Our cluster groups are simply applying a label matching step to the clusters to create these groups, and they're dynamic. So lastly, let's look at our repos. Now, in order to create a repo, you need to give the repo a name, and this is the one I deleted earlier, but let's put it back. And this installs logging services to all nodes. And it needs a URL to my Git repo. And one of our colleagues here has a repo just for this, for doing logging. So I will type that in. So I do the path to where the repo is, and then, or the base path to the repo. And then I add the secondary paths, and let's do logging.crd first, /logging. And this is the path. If I've typed everything correctly, this will successfully create. And those two are the paths below that master core bundles that contain YAML manifest files, Helm charts, what have you. So not only do I need to specify this, but I need to tell it to what systems do I deploy this? And this is very easy because the default is to all clusters in that workspace. And that workspace would be fleet default, and that would be the 2 clusters that are there. I have the choice, though, in this dropdown to select specific clusters. So I could select my Edge Raspberry Pi or my T-R1 cluster. Or I could come down here and use those cluster groups. I could say this will always deploy to my Edge x86 64 clusters. And so I just simply define that. I hit create, and voila, it will distribute that logging, getting the update, and it will now distribute that logging application or services to my boxes automatically. There it begins to start, and there's the CRDs. But again, like I said, those will auto resolve out of all of everything as it retries them. So pretty simple to do. My repos, once created, well, let's say I set up my repos and define my cluster groups, assigning the associate labels to them. If I go back to the drawing board, build a brand new cluster, and assign my labels at the beginning, then, and notice this one's fixing itself automatically. There it is. The logging became active once that's done. This one has several more resources available, so it takes a little bit longer, and it'll, again, the beauty of Kubernetes is that it knows how to self-heal. But once I define my repos and my cluster groups, as I build those new clusters and define those labels at the beginning, then as soon as that cluster is created and imported or registered into Rancher, it automatically recognizes a label set, recognizes the cluster groups, finds the repos that are associated to one or more, and then deploys and pushes everything out to those boxes. And voila, you have a self-maintained system. And if you remember in the presentation, I create a hash when I download that bundle from GitHub or wherever my target or my source is, I should call it. And so that defines my revision number. And so if I check every 15 seconds to see if anything has changed, and if the files up in that repo area are changed, I will create a brand new bundle, brand new hash, and distribute that down to the systems. And the beauty is I only have to maintain and monitor the current version. If you ever wanted to go back and do an older version, then leverage the versioning aspect of GitHub to help you do that, to make whatever those older versions are current. We will recognize that and distribute that change all the way down. So we're 150 out of 151, and that'll finish up here soon, and we'll be golden. So again, the self-healing is beautiful. But really, that's the heart of doing continuous delivery inside of Rancher. You get your cluster group set up, you build your repos, and you assign those repos to the appropriate cluster groups or clusters. Oh, the one thing I didn't show was there is an advanced option. If your choice of cluster group, and those targets, if that doesn't work for you, then if you go to the advanced mode, then you get the ability to come in here and define your own very complex label matching criteria to be used as a determining the target groups, if you will, or target clusters for that particular repo. Anyway, so again, fully configured. Both of these are now active. Everything is good. Our clusters are looking good, and our cluster groups are doing well. So we've deployed our apps. We've got them self-healed, and life is good. Anyway, simple demo. If you've got any questions, you can reach me, B6 at SUSE.com is my email. Feel free to reach out and explore this more. Go see other sessions that are related, and look forward to seeing you out there on the net.